Oh, good morning. This is Ken Barron with the National Association of Black and White Men Together. Topic for today: BIPOCs are a strong force for moderation. BIPOCs is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. From the mid 1980s to the early 1990s, Democrat centrists bitterly complained that Jesse Jackson and his progressive allies were pushing the party too far left. Quote, "We are losing because the people weren't buying the message we were selling." And that's from the head of the Democratic Leadership Council, then the leading moderate Democratic group, and they told Time magazine in 1992. Jackson, in turn, called the DLC the quote, Democratic leisure class. Using the leverage of his Rainbow Coalition and the support he gained through the presidential campaigns in 1984 and 1988, Jackson pushed the party conventions to adopt more liberal stances than the nominees wanted. Now, some 40 years later, the racial and ideological split in the Democratic Party has been flipped on its head. White, well educated liberals are the leading proponents of cultural and identity politics that often alienate swing middle class voters. Black and other minority Democrats are a strong force for moderation. This internal upheaval results from changing democrats characteristic of white Democrats, especially the rising percentage of whites with a college degree, and the shifting focus of the liberal agenda from racial and economic equality to cultural war, issues of identity politics, sex and gender, and personal autonomy. If we go back to the 1980s, Francis Lee, a political scientist at Princeton, wrote by email in response to inquiries, the Jesse Jackson forces were the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But Lee said black voters today are no longer on the party's left flank. Since the late 1990s, the share of white Democrats identifying as liberally roughly doubled from about 30% to 61%, while black Democrats moved only modestly. Ideological shifts in the Democratic Party are to a considerable extent the story of the changing shape of the coalition, Lee continued. In 1992, most of Bill Clinton's supporters were white voters without college degrees who made up about a quarter of the Democratic coalition. White college graduates are now more liberal across the board. As cultural war issues have become more important to the partisan divide, the differences between black and white Democrats on these issues become more important. Black Democrats are more religious and more traditional on cultural issues than white Democrats. The moral and cultural gulf between black and white Democrats has grown steadily. A November 2025 Pew survey found that 75% of black Democrats believed with absolute certainty in God, and 65% prayed daily, compared with the 29% and 24% of white Democrats. Along similar lines, a 2022 American Enterprise Institute study found that white liberals favor, quote, cutting some funds from police departments in the community and shifting to social services, and that was by 71 to 27%. Black voters were much more closely split, 53% to 44%, and Hispanic voters were opposed with 40% for the shifting funds to social services and 57% against doing so. The eternal Democratic divide is particularly acute on cultural, gender, and sexual issues. The split is larger on transgender issues. In January 2022, Pew posted research that had asked voters to state whether someone who is a man or a woman is determined by sex assigned at birth or can be different than that. Black Democrats chose assigned at birth 66 to 33%. White Democrats chose can be different from sex assigned at birth by an even larger number of 72-27. At the start of this century, combined Pew and Gallup data shows a relatively similar percentage of liberal identification amongst white Democrats. Black Democrats and Hispanic Democrats. By 2024, however, according to the Brookings Institute, 63% of white Democrats identified as liberal, a 29-point increase from more than the 14-point increase for black Democrats to 39%, and the 12-point increase for Hispanic Democrats to 41%. Posing questions about the changing racial and ideological shifts within the Democratic coalition, um, American Identity Project, a centrist Democratic think tank, is like throwing most meat at a hungry lion. They applied by email, citing four major issues on which, quote, black voters have indeed become moderating forces compared with white liberals. First, crime. A 2024 American Enterprise Institute survey found that non-white working class voters oppose reducing police budgets by a 30-point margin, while the white liberal college graduates favored reducing police budgets by a 20-point margin. Next, patriotism. Patriotism. Some 62% of Asian Americans, 70% of Black Americans, and 76% of Hispanic Americans said they were proud to be American, compared with just 34% of progressive activists. Racial preferences is next. When asking black people should work their way up, quote, without special favors, white liberals were about 12 points less likely to agree than black voters. The insistence of white liberals on racial preferences has been a very negative effect on the Democrats. Institutes have found that moving to the center on racial preference in college admission was the most electorally fruitful move Democrats could make, and that doing so on racial preferences in government contracting was the second most important. The reversal of ideological positioning of white and Democratic and minority Democrats is closely connected to the class conversion of the Democratic Party from the party of working class to the party of well-educated whites. A senior vice president for social policy at Third Way, a centrist think tank, contended that the great class inversion of the Democratic Party is a huge driver of this shift in dynamics. Even as recently as 2008, Democrats were a working class party, as 7 in 10 voters in the coalition didn't have a college degree. By 2024, that share fell by 16 points, corresponding with equal growth in the proportion of college-educated voters in the country. Result: today's white Democratic voters bear little resemblance to the white Democrats of the Jesse Jackson era. Jackson used to say that parties need two wings to fly. He was right, but it turns out that the voters of color are now leading the moderate wing of the modern Democratic Party. According to a 2024 AP Votecast data, when asked to rank their level of concern of top issues in the 2024 election, white progressives expressed the most common concern about, quote, the effects of climate change. While nearly 70% of black Latinos and white non-college voters were most concerned about the cost of food and groceries. The shift from downstairs party of the last century to the upstairs party of today is extensively a concern and reinforces this ideological reorganization. The racial, ideological, and class alternatives of the Democratic Party have created a damaging dynamic both internally and in competition with the Republican Party. The Democratic Party has definitely moved left. It is now dominated by college-educated and relatively affluent elites. This has helped to drive less educated working-class voters with more traditional values to the Republican camp. The white working-class voters who favor Republicans are struggling economically, but don't feel that their struggles are given the same basic attention. As for Black Americans, they remain a mainstay of the Democratic Party, but they do not tend to be more moderate than the well-educated. They do tend to be more moderate than well-educated whites. In 1988, Jesse Jackson campaigned for the Democratic nomination on a coherent and comprehensive social democratic platform. But it made Jackson the wrong answer to the basic strategic question facing his party: that's how to halt the steady defection of socially traditional blue collar voters that was unraveling the New Deal majority. The problem for us who would like to shift power within the Democratic Party from liberal white elites to more moderate constituencies is that the white elites hold power and won't give it up without a fight, because they vote, donate, and participate heavily in party organizations more than any other major bloc. They dominate and exert disproportionate influence among party activists, primary voters, campaign staff, advocacy organizations, the media, nonprofit leaderships, and donor networks. It may well be the internal power lies within those who are happy campers, just where they are, and that the party as currently constructed cannot and will not dig itself out of the hole it's in. That was an opinion from Ken Barron at the National Association of Black and White Men Together. Check out us on lots of social media places. And moreover, please go to our website, nabwmt.org. Again, thank you for listening.